Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. It's Wednesday, November 12th, 2025, and today we're going to be answering 3 questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last 7 days. And as we do each week, we take our questions that we ask here on the roundup from our newsletter that comes out on Monday mornings. And for those of you not familiar, our newsletter called All the SMIE News Fit to Share comes out in 2 forms, both email and LinkedIn. So whichever way you prefer, you can subscribe to either one or both if you choose through our website at smieconsulting.org/subscribe. And on that page, you'll find not only an archive of all our past editions, all 350 or so past editions of the weekly newsletter, but also a subscription link for the email version and a link to the LinkedIn version where you can subscribe. Between the 2 versions, we now have almost 2,800 subscribers around the world that are getting our newsletter content each week. So thank you for to those of you who are already subscribed, thank you for making the Midweek Roundup as well as the newsletter a part of your regular international edification each week. And as we do with the newsletter, there are several different topic areas we cover each week there, that basically the top news stories that are social media related, and that can be a very broad topic of anything really online. Could be webinars coming up on related fields or related topics to our field of international education. It could be upcoming data releases from major providers, studies and surveys that have been done in our field that we need to share. It could be topics on AI. It could be anything to do with social media, obviously, and how it's applied in international education and specifically student recruitment. So we cover all of those topics in that section. We have a U.S. Central section that goes over the top news stories. That could be acts of Congress. It could be new executive orders, legal cases that come up, or new data reports that are, or NAFSA reports, or anything else that we need to be aware of, or advocacy alerts, those types of things. Then a Solutions Central section, and that Solutions Central section includes kind of the positive areas of what institutions are doing to kind of address certain challenges that they're facing in international education. Also talking about solutions that might be coming up that other vendors or other service providers have been releasing that have proven results. It could be positive blog articles that suggest a new way of doing things. So Solutions Central, and then we have a Global Roundup. And the Global Roundup is probably one of my favorite sections each week, because I know how hard it is for us in U.S. international education circles on institutional campuses. I work for a University of Akron. I'm the Director of International Recruitment and Engagement there. But I know how difficult it gets in our jobs, just trying to keep up with all the news, but also appreciating what's happening in the wider world around us when it comes to international student mobility. Because we're not the only game in town, and we all realize that. But to know how our colleagues are approaching international education in different markets, in Canada, in the UK, in Australia, in New Zealand, finding out from them what the issues of the day are there, what their governments are doing to complicate their lives or make them easier in a certain few cases, and other destination markets around the world where students are looking to go. And it might be as a result of new government policies that are making it easier for students to study there, because there's post-study work permission that's being rolled out and pathways to residency. It could be new government scholarships that countries are trying out. It could be visa situations that are impacting changes in their institution's approach to international education. So there's a whole range of topics that can be included in that Global Roundup section. And that's important for us in the U.S. to know. And sometimes it's just a matter of recognizing we're not the only ones suffering right now. And certainly in the U.S., we've had our fair share of challenges over the last 10, 11 months with all the executive orders and changes and seemingly very unfriendly to policy decisions to international students. But are we seeing the thawing? Are we seeing some changes coming? We'll certainly talk about that in the weeks to come. But what we do here on the Roundup is focus on some of those themes we see developing in the newsletter each week. We ask a question about a certain topic that might be relevant to each of us on our daily jobs with our campuses, and see if there's ways that what is happening with these news stories, these topics, can be implemented on your individual campuses. So let's get straight to our first question of the day, and that is international marketing really that different? And it seems like a fairly simplistic question with a duh answer to it. Of course they're different, but I wonder how often colleges around the United States who maybe make a decision to go into international recruitment and marketing to students abroad, if they even think about the implications of what they're doing. I will share a very specific story that, again, I've been in this business 32 years. And for me, I've traveled to now 82 different countries recruiting students around the world. Kind of been there, seen it, done it, got the t-shirt. But I had an experience last month in Saudi Arabia where our mascot and the university name, we all have our university nicknames, right? We're the University of Akron Zips, and our mascot is Zippy. And as I'm doing my first fair in the Middle East for the university, we had a number of pieces of paraphernalia, marketing material on my table, one of which was our mascot, who is a female kangaroo, Zippy. And that it doesn't say her name on it anywhere, but she's a kangaroo. And the other was a piece of kind of a cardboard 8.5 by 11 card on poster board that somebody could hold up and say, and it says "I heart Zippy" on it. So those were available on my table. I started meeting with students and parents, and I had noticed a couple of groups of high school boys that had come that I would see them kind of snickering to themselves and pointing at that "I heart Zippy" sign. And I was like, okay, what's going on here? So had this conversation with a dad later on who was shopping for his daughter for a university, trying to find someone. He had actually grown up going to a high school very close to our university campus. And he shared with me the story that back in when he was attending high school, there was a grocery store, a mom and pop grocery store called Zippy's, because it was close to the university, and there was a tie-in there. It made sense, right, to have that as a name for a university, a grocery store in that area. And he said it was owned by a Middle Eastern guy. And he said, it was kind of an in-house joke with the Middle Eastern students and and community that the name of our team is another word for the Zips, is another word for a certain part of the male body. Not going into specifics here, but you can use your imagination. And then I said, oh, really? Okay, well, that makes it interesting. And he said, yeah, that sign there, "I heart Zippy," basically that means I heart this part of the male anatomy. And so this was obviously very eye-opening and humorous at the time, and certainly references to that sign and our mascot I took off the table at that moment to kind of remove that. I'm texting with my boss to explain the situation, and he's running it up the flagpole to our leadership. And that was the real issue, is like, oh my goodness, this is never something that had come up before. The university hadn't really done done active international recruitment for a number of years, and certainly there are not a series of checks with our international faculty on our mascot name and our university name, and it never really been brought up to leadership. And I will say our leadership has changed, the senior leadership has changed quite a bit in the last couple of years, so there may have been some institutional history lost, but certainly internationally, I don't think that had ever been part of a conversation. So we had this important meeting that with our leadership, and shared this piece of information, and had it confirmed independently from a conversation with someone related to a senior vice provost to confirm, yes, it is indeed what we think it is, and that would be and certainly not something to emphasize significantly in recruitment in the Middle East. It's a slang word apparently in certain parts of Saudi Arabia and perhaps beyond in the Middle East. So it was an important piece for us to know that this is a real challenge. And this was our experience again that I had in Saudi Arabia last month. That is a kind of a case study, a cautionary tale, if you will, about how international marketing, how you market yourself as an institution, is that different and has to be that different. And you have to think about these things. And that there are other real simple examples of this. We know those who have been in international recruitment for more than a minute and have used digital channels to try and reach students in certain countries. You know that in China, for example, it's a completely different social media ecosystem. There are various other versions of WeChat, of WhatsApp, of Twitter, of YouTube, of Facebook, all of that, of TikTok's homegrown version, Douyin, is there as well. So it's a whole different ecosystem. And unless you're on those platforms and have verified accounts in China, your content, it really isn't going to be visible, or is going to be way, way, way down any search rankings on Baidu or other Chinese search engines. So this is something we know that having locally hosted content in China is very important. There are several vendors, Synortis and Sunrise, that have done this kind of work for a few years now. So marketing in China, we all know it's different, and it has to be. Content needs to be in native languages in many countries if you're going to truly reach a broad audience and have the impact you want. So is international marketing really that different? Yes, obviously. But there are some macro issues as well that you think about with branding messages that the university has. Are those truly applicable around the world equally? That's part of a conversation when you start. We're having this conversation now. We've at the University of Akron, we've tied up with InUni as our major recruitment partner internationally, and also partnership development. And we've developed content together, and we had one international piece, an international flyer with shows what the process is for international students, costs, scholarships, and majors that are available to international students. And that's one thing that in and of itself can be very different. The academic programs that are available to international students is typically going to be different. Not completely different, but there will be certain things, certain programs that you offer that aren't available to international students. That needs to be figured in. But larger questions on branding, on messaging, on mascots, as we're finding out, these are issues that we need to be very aware of. So there's a couple of articles that I'll drop into the chat when I have the time. They're also in the newsletter, so you'll be able to go to our website to get this week's version of the newsletter if you don't already have it, to follow along for which stories these are. So the stories, one of which was a LinkedIn article from someone who's been in the business a number of years, talking about the international marketing for universities when it comes to student recruitment. And he raises some interesting points about not just cut and paste what you do domestically, internationally, gives some examples on some messaging issues that you might run into globally. So these are things to think about. Also, there's a webinar coming up tomorrow, the 13th, Keystone's putting on, that's specifically for international recruitment and finding your niche as a smaller university or college. College, and there are some interesting topics that will be discussed there. The link to that webinar will be in the chat, but it's also again in the newsletter from earlier this week. So certainly, if you haven't already gotten the newsletter, please go to our website to get this week's edition and follow along at smieconsulting.org/subscribe, and there's an archive of all the previous weeks, 350 or so, that we've done of the newsletter since 2018. So we're glad that we're still able to provide that content to you, and those two articles and everything else that we'll cover today is going to be there for your use. Now, one other piece related to this question that I will talk about is having channels available internationally, because this is one of those questions that goes around international admissions offices. If you're within a domestic admissions office, an overall enrollment management office, and you share social media channels, then it's perhaps a little easier decision rather than being in a separate unit where you probably do need to have your own social channels. That's a debate that does go on campus, but knowing that you will need to emphasize certain channels more in certain countries as opposed to others, knowing which are the top social media platforms in various countries. There's a variety of resources. We share those regularly here in the newsletter, but also talk about the up and coming ones here on the Roundup when we have content to share. But knowing that what platforms are used in the major markets you're trying to recruit in, and not only the platforms where like you could do advertising, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, whatever it might be, or TikTok has gained popularity in a number of countries, but also knowing where certain platforms are not used. So TikTok will not work in India. It's been banned for a number of years by the government there. TikTok, as we know it in the US, is available to most of the rest of the world, but isn't available in China. It's a very different TikTok, even though it's a Chinese company. So these are the things that you need to be aware of as you set forth your plans and your content strategies. And it does take, there's a lot of moving parts here, changing parts from year to year, changing platforms from year to year. So what you did last year shouldn't always be what you do this year, and having a process to review your approaches every year is an important piece of the overall puzzle, and certainly having a team to make that happen. If you're a one-person shop, it's an insurmountable task usually. So it's a matter of picking and choosing your battles, focusing on what you can control, and maybe getting partners to share your content and getting it in front of the right audiences. So that's what we got for the first question. Let's move on to the second question, which is, what are the true costs of lost STEM talent in the United States? Now, we all know in higher ed, in international admissions circles, that STEM is a big driver for international students who are considering the United States. Why? Because those are the kinds of in-demand programs that perhaps are not available in enough supply in their home countries. They're looking to come to the institutions and the country that does them best. And the U.S. has that reputation. We're in the tops of all the rankings. Not maybe our specific institution, but our institutions in general are at the tops of most of the rankings that you see out there. So for us, when we talk about international recruitment, it almost inevitably starts when you're having a conversation with families and students about what are your STEM programs, or do you have X, Y, and Z STEM programs. STEM is a part of that conversation. And the larger piece of that, for those, depending on where you are in the world, if post-study work is an important part of what that student or what that family is after, then you're emphasizing your STEM OPT programs. You're emphasizing that these are available for 3 years of post-study work if you do a degree in a STEM field. So those are absolute game changers when you're talking to families in certain countries. It doesn't matter everywhere, but those can be game changers if post-study work is on the radar of any of the students in the countries that you're recruiting. So we know that STEM students coming to us are an important part of who we bring into our campuses every year. It's not exclusive, but it's certainly a big part. And it's not just the universities that bring them in. We're seeing the impact of this with this H-1B changes and what that means. That, in fact, what it will likely mean if it stays as is, and who knows what the final version will be with the H-1B changes. But we know that tech companies that have two basic pools of potential employees to hire every year. One would for international candidates. The international students that are studying at our universities that have been on OPT already and perhaps may already be working for these companies, for the STEM companies that might be looking to hire them more permanently. And the others would be direct hires from overseas to come to the U.S. to work for those companies. We know India is 70% of the H-1B markets. China is about 16%. So no surprise, those two. You probably, if you don't follow these trends, you may be surprised at how significant Indian students are in the H-1, or Indians in general are in the H-1B category. Those same percentages also apply to the OPT. It is about 70% of those are OPT students are Indian as well, maybe a little less. So those two pools of talent for companies to hire are either the students already here or the ones they're going to have to bring over from overseas. Up until now, it's been a pretty close mix between those that are hired internally who are already in the country working on OPT as part of their H1 or F1 status, and those that are brought directly over from India or other countries. So what is changing, and the way it looks right now, is that students are going to have a competitive advantage over, and I think they already did have or should have had a competitive advantage over those candidates that might be coming from overseas. And especially now, if a company wants to hire somebody direct from overseas, and that also applies to universities, they would have to pay $100,000. Not the student or the applicant, but the company who's going to sponsor them for their H-1B would have to pay $100,000 to bring them direct from overseas to the United States. So that is prohibitive, cost prohibitive for most companies in the United States. Particularly smaller companies that maybe don't have budgets for that. The regular cost to sponsor someone for an H-1B is between $1,000 and $5,000, depending on whether it gets expedited or not. But for most outside of the big tech companies that are already spending obscene amounts of money to hire AI talent, that would $100,000 may be nothing for them. The majority of companies are now, who might normally have been hiring students or people direct from overseas, will now be in a situation where, hey, we don't really have the budget to go pay $100,000 for everybody we want to bring from overseas. So let's refocus our efforts on campus and on companies that are already hiring students from F1 status into STEM OPT or OPT fields. And those are the two paths. But universities now are going to become, and their students on F1 STEM OPT are really going to be the key targets for a lot of these companies now that would be looking at hiring them or sponsoring them for H-1Bs. But if true cuts get made, and we don't know, it's more theoretical right now. We know there's been reputational damage to the United States that's been done since with the Trump administration, with a lot of the policies. Just the sheer mention of changes in policy to H-1B certainly scares off a lot of people. Certainly in India, I was there when it got changed the first time before they put in that clarification that if you're a student and are in the U.S. already in valid status, your company would not have to pay that. But for those who are looking to go direct, it's a big challenge. So will that increase more applicants coming for master's degrees from India? Probably, because if the policy stays as is, the challenge really is getting the visa appointments. We don't have a shortage of interest right now. We have, it's been down for a couple of years, but certainly if now having this H-1B direct pathway from India kind of ruled out for all but the biggest companies, you're going to see a lot more, hopefully, interest in coming direct for masters if we can get the visa situation sorted out. And I'm going to be going to the AIRC conference in early December in Atlanta. Looking forward to conversations there with our Indian partners and finding out from them. They're on the ground, they're meeting with students regularly, talking to our partners at InUni, what's happening and how is it being processed, how is the H-1B news being digested, so I can relay that back to our departments who are eager to enroll those students to see what extra they might need to do to get them in the door. So these are the things that we don't know the true cost yet, but one report has come out in the last week that is suggesting that annually the true cost of lost STEM talent could be as much as, we forget about the amount of the billions, $4 or $5 billion that are lost in terms of reduced in overall international students coming to the United States. This report shared that the cost could be up to $480 billion per year. That's significant. We're going to talk, hopefully next week. I'll be in Saudi Arabia next week for an event, so I don't know if I'm going to have time to go live, but I may have an evening. We'll see what happens, but we'll share that if we can. But certainly in 2 weeks, we'll be back in right before Thanksgiving talking about issues of the day. But we'll see what we see on the ground as some of the impacts of these policy changes will be. Now, with the last bit of time that we have here today, I want to share not an obituary, because I never would wish that upon any of my colleagues in international education, no matter where they are in the world. But our friends north of the border have suffered greatly over the last couple of years. For those who don't know the history, there was the IRCC in Canada, the Minister of Immigration there imposed, again with Justin Trudeau's previous Prime Minister's blessing, imposed caps on new study permits issued in 2023 and 2024 and 2025. Initially, it was supposed to be 30 to 35% cap in 2024, and this year was supposed to be a 10 or 15% cap. That was a cap on new study permits. And there were exemptions carved out for grad students, and it was really focused on the kind of a vocational track students and bachelor's degree students. So, because those have been the areas most ripe with abuse by fraudulent agents, by fake fraudulent documents. They implemented a new system called the Provincial Attestation Letters, PALs, that students had to show that they had before they could apply for their study permits. There's new processes put in place that basically began to regulate the market in a way that had never been done before. It's certainly compared to what we have in the U.S., it's nothing like SEVIS or anything like that. But this provincial attestation letters were verifiable documents that institutions had a quota on that they could use to submit for their new students coming in. So that process was new. The challenge was complicated by other things going on with public relations issues with India and a kind of diplomatic chill between the two countries, where Indian students were upwards of 40 to 50% of all international students in Canada at one point prior to 2023, of the close to 1 million overall students, and almost half of them were maybe 380, 400,000 were from India, coming primarily for vocational programs, even though they already had master's degrees in a lot of cases, because they were seeing it as a pathway to residency and potential citizenship someday after they're done working. So Canada has really struggled in the last couple of years. There's been financial challenges at many of these institutions. A lot of the public-private partnerships at the vocational college level have really been impacted. The private ones that at some point in these partnerships were 90% international students at some point, and just basically money-making bodies. Those have basically been shut down. Very few of those are still able to survive given the caps that are in place. So there was real reputational and real damage done with these caps that were put in place. And people say, well, reputational damage, how do you really quantify that? Well, think about this. The cap was 35% for 2024. The actual reductions that they achieved in new study permits issued was 47% reductions. So they got far fewer folks saying, okay, we're not going to be able to cut. If the numbers are going to be restricted, we're not going to be able to get in, so we're not even going to bother. So they went from a 35% cap or reduction in new study permits issued to a reality of 47% or so in 2024. The numbers so far for 2025, where they had in place a 10 to 15% cap, are already tracking at 60 to 65% reduction. So they're well exceeding the 10 to 15% they wanted. They're getting 60 to 65% reduction on the previous year. So the numbers have come down already dramatically, and that is shuttering programs at many institutions that had previously depended and become 50% or more of their student body basically being international. They've lost those revenue streams. They can't afford to keep these programs open. They're laying off faculty. They're laying off staff. They're closing programs. That's happening nationwide in Canada, outside of maybe the elites that have never had to worry about numbers. So there's some real challenges going on already. And then in the last week, you've had a raft of announcements come out from the Canadian government and provincial governments. You've had the province of Quebec, French-speaking province, has now eliminated the permanent residency pathway and even potential work opportunity for international graduates, effective in, I think, 2027. So that province is particularly nixing the idea of, well, basically eliminating any future international student graduates wanting to stay in Quebec, removing that ability for them to even think about it. So that's happened. You have had now the Prime Minister in the new budget is saying they're going to be 50% caps in 2026, 27, and 28 to further reduce, further 50% reductions in the number of study permits in the next 3 years, 26, 27, 28 in that next budget cycle. So it's just a slaughterhouse up north of the border in terms of what's happening in international ed. They're just spent last week in the Philippines, and my last day in the Philippines was meeting with some of the aggregators, AECC, Adventist, and one other. And one of the major aggregators is saying, "Hey, we're turning off the tap in Canada. We're not even going to recruit for Canadian institutions anymore because that market is tanked. No one wants to go to Canada anymore." And the reality is some will always want to go, but as a market for them, as agent aggregators, they're not seeing it. They're not seeing value in the market anymore. They're cutting it off. So that's dramatic. And is Canada closing its doors to international students? It certainly seems like it from the outside in. When you have 2 years that you've just had, 24 and 25, where you've more than half each year have reduced your study permit intakes. And a lot of that has also been down to study permit rejections that have skyrocketed. Rates have skyrocketed where they used to be in the 80s to 90% approval rates. You got them global averages now dropping below 50% in I think overall, and in some countries less than 40%. So those are real issues, and they're going to achieve their goals whether they like it or not. And certainly the institutions certainly do not like it. We all know that there needed to be some kind of course correction in Canada because it was too big for its own, for its institutional capacity. We know the housing issues, the health services issues that were happening were just overwhelming a lot of smaller towns and even big cities where students were sharing 10 to a 2-bedroom apartment, and that just isn't sustainable. And that has led to challenges in Australia, in the UK, and obviously in Canada with housing. So they have course corrected in probably 180-degree direction from where they were going. They certainly needed to make changes, but did they need to be as dramatic as they have been? Most international educators in Canada will say no if they still have their jobs. So we're really seeing of the big four, they are probably suffering the worst of all of us now. we thought we were. And this is again why I emphasized the perspective piece at the beginning. This is knowing that, hey, we're not the worst case. We're not the worst in the game in the world right now in terms of attracting students, in terms of government policies. There was maybe one bright light in the pipeline and it may reconfigure the dynamic of international students interested in Canada. That there are master's degree students and doctoral students are going to be exempt from these caps in certain disciplines that are high need disciplines in the economy in Canada. So you're going to see a shift, I think, because as I mentioned earlier, the majority of I think well over half of the close to 1 million international students in Canada in 2023 were at the vocational level. And can you imagine, in the U.S., we have maybe 35 to 40,000 max at vocational level programs in the United States. Canada had 10 times that amount, at least. If you're looking at 450, 500,000 students in Canada were in vocational programs. Again, a lot of these public-private partnerships, predominantly from India. The Indian market is perhaps going to change, which may be a challenge for us in the U.S. because we are the Indian students that typically come to the U.S. are at the master's level, maybe 75% or so. So we're going to be competing more directly for Canada. With Canada for those same Indian students in the future if they're going to get priority pathways for work after graduation. So we'll see what happens with Canada, but spare a thought, say a prayer for them if you are a religious person or a spiritual person, because they need all the help they can get in international ed there right now. So that's all we have for you this week, and I appreciate you being a part of the conversation. Looking forward to chatting with you again in the weeks to come. Have a great day.